The 1960s were a decade of profound change in America, and summers during this era reflected the dynamic shifts in society, culture, and politics. Let's take a journey back to explore what summer was like during this transformative time. The early 1960s saw the continuation of the post-war economic boom. Summers were a time of optimism and prosperity for many Americans. The rise of suburbs meant more families had access to backyard barbecues and private swimming pools, changing the nature of summer socializing. Civil rights movements gained momentum during the summers of the 1960s. The Freedom Rides of 1961 and the March on Washington in August 1963 became defining moments of the decade. Summers often saw increased activism and demonstrations across the country. The space race captivated the nation throughout the 1960s, culminating in the moon landing in July 1969. Summer nights were often spent stargazing, with many Americans dreaming of space travel and the possibilities of the future. Music underwent a revolution in the 1960s, and summer was the season for outdoor concerts and festivals. The decade saw the rise of rock and roll, folk music, and later, psychedelic rock. The Monterey Pop Festival in June 1967 and Woodstock in August 1969 became iconic summer events. Beach culture flourished in the 1960s, with surfing becoming a national obsession. The Beach Boys' music, surf movies, and the image of the carefree surfer came to symbolize the American summer for many teenagers and young adults. Drive-in movie theaters reached peak popularity during this decade. Families and couples would spend warm summer evenings watching films from their cars, creating a unique American summer tradition that defined the era. The civil rights movement gained momentum during the summers of the 1960s. Landmark events like the Freedom Rides of 1961 and the March on Washington in August 1963 became defining moments, often taking place during the heat of summer. The Vietnam War increasingly dominated public consciousness as the decade progressed. Summers saw a rise in anti-war protests on college campuses and in cities across the nation, changing the tone of the season for many young Americans. Summer fashion underwent a revolution in the 1960s. Miniskirts, bold colors, and psychedelic patterns became popular. Men's fashion also became more casual, with t-shirts and jeans becoming staples of summer attire. Music festivals became a summer staple, culminating in the iconic Woodstock Festival in August 1969. These events brought together thousands of young people, showcasing the decade's revolutionary music and counterculture. The space race captivated the nation throughout the 1960s summers. Families gathered around televisions to watch rocket launches, and the moon landing in July 1969 became a defining moment of the decade. Environmental awareness grew during 1960s summers. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, published in 1962, sparked concern about pesticide use and laid the groundwork for the modern environmental movement. Summer sports saw new heroes emerge. In baseball, players like Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris captivated fans, while Muhammad Ali became a controversial and influential figure in boxing. The rise of commercial air travel made summer vacations to distant destinations more accessible to middle-class Americans. International tourism began to boom, changing the nature of summer travel. The feminist movement gained momentum in the 1960s, challenging traditional summer activities and gender roles. More women entered the workforce, altering family dynamics during summer months. Fast food culture exploded in the 1960s, with chains like McDonald's changing summer dining habits. Drive-thrus became popular for families on summer road trips, altering the American culinary landscape. The British invasion, led by the Beatles, transformed American music. Their summer tours in the mid-1960s created unprecedented fan hysteria and influenced fashion and culture. Summer camps evolved in the 1960s, offering more diverse programs in arts, sciences, and sports. The concept of the summer learning gap began to gain attention among educators and parents. The assassinations of prominent figures like John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. cast a pall over the nation, affecting the mood of subsequent summers and sparking periods of unrest. NASA's Mercury and Gemini programs saw several launches during summer months, captivating the public imagination and inspiring a generation of children to dream of becoming astronauts. The introduction of the birth control pill in 1960 led to significant social changes, impacting summer romances and relationships throughout the decade. Summer reading lists began to include more diverse and controversial books, reflecting changing social attitudes and the push for greater inclusivity in education. The rise of muscle cars changed summer for many American teenagers. Cruising and drag racing became popular activities in many towns, creating a new youth car culture. Public swimming pools became battlegrounds for civil rights, with many communities struggling to implement desegregation during summer months, leading to tensions and protests. The Cold War influenced summer activities, with many families building fallout shelters. Children participated in air raid drills even during summer school programs. Amusement parks like Disneyland hit their stride in the 1960s, becoming popular summer vacation destinations for American families and setting new standards for entertainment. The 1960s saw a camping boom, with more families spending summer vacations in national parks and forests. Improvements in camping gear and the interstate highway system facilitated this trend. Summer blockbuster movies began to emerge in the late 1960s. Films like The Graduate, 1967, and Easy Rider, 1969, drew large summer audiences and influenced American culture. The space age influenced summer fashion, with futuristic designs and metallic fabrics becoming trendy. Space-age accessories and go-go boots were popular among fashion-forward youth. Skateboarding culture emerged in the 1960s, particularly in California. It provided a new summer activity for teens and would go on to influence fashion, music, and art in subsequent decades. The Summer of Love in 1967 saw thousands of young people flock to San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district. This event epitomized the hippie counterculture movement and its impact on American society. Color television became increasingly common in American homes during the 1960s. Summer programming, including shows like The Andy Griffith Show and Bonanza, provided entertainment for families on hot evenings. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, signed into law in July, marked a watershed moment in American history. It prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The summer saw both celebration and continued struggle as the nation grappled with its implications. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, passed in August, further strengthened civil rights protections. It outlawed discriminatory voting practices that had been used to disenfranchise Black voters. The summer following its passage saw increased voter registration drives across the South. The Summer of Love in 1967 epitomized the hippie counterculture. Thousands of young people flocked to San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district, embracing ideals of peace, love, and personal freedom. The event captured media attention and influenced fashion, music, and social norms. Democratic National Convention of 1968 in Chicago became a flashpoint for political and social tensions. Protests against the Vietnam War turned violent, with clashes between demonstrators and police dominating news coverage throughout that tumultuous summer. Stonewall riots in June 1969 marked a turning point for LGBTQ+ rights. The spontaneous demonstrations against a police raid on a gay bar in New York City sparked the modern gay rights movement, leading to annual pride marches in subsequent summers. The Apollo 11 moon landing in July 1969 captivated the world. Millions watched as Neil Armstrong took his one small step on the lunar surface, marking a triumphant moment in the space race and inspiring a generation of dreamers and innovators. The Woodstock Music and Art Fair in August 1969 became an iconic representation of 1960s counterculture. Despite logistical challenges, the festival drew hundreds of thousands of attendees, featuring legendary performances and embodying the spirit of the era. The rise of the Black Power movement was evident in the summers of the late 1960s. Organizations like the Black Panther Party organized community programs and protests, challenging systemic racism and advocating for Black self-determination. The National Environmental Policy Act, signed into law in January 1970, capped a decade of growing environmental awareness. Summers saw increased outdoor recreation and conservation efforts as Americans became more conscious of their impact on nature. The Women's Strike for Equality on August 26, 1970, marked the 50th anniversary of women's suffrage in the U.S. Tens of thousands of women across the country participated, demanding equal opportunities in education and employment. The summers of the 1960s were a crucible of change, shaping the trajectory of American society for decades to come. From civil rights marches to moon landings, from counterculture festivals to environmental awakenings, these summers witnessed moments of triumph, struggle, and transformation. They reflected a nation grappling with its identity as new ideas and movements challenged long-held norms and beliefs. As we look back on those tumultuous summers, we see the roots of many contemporary issues and cultural phenomena. The activism, music, fashion, and technological advancements of the 1960s continue to influence American life today. While much has changed, the spirit of those summers, a mix of optimism, rebellion, and the pursuit of justice, remains an integral part of the American story, reminding us of our capacity for growth and change as a nation.